Welcome to Train Signal's course scenarios for the Windows 7 deployment training course. In this lesson, I'm going to start with 4 different deployment scenarios. We'll cover each one so you understand the differences between them. Then, I want to talk a little bit more in detail about Wired Brain Coffee Corporation and Green Lizard Books, what their corporate needs are for deployment, and how we're going to help them meet those needs. Then, I'll get into the network deployment process. This is about a 50,000-foot view, so it's pretty high level. I'll talk a little bit about image formats, the types of images that you can create. There are different types of installations, terms I'm going to use throughout the entire course that you should be aware of. And last, Windows operating systems now require activation. Now, they've required activation to show that they're genuine operating systems for quite some time. But activation can now be something that a client doesn't have to connect directly to Microsoft to do. You could set up an activation server locally, but then you still run into that problem of mobile users, guys that never come into the office. How are they ever going to be activated? I'll cover just a little bit on that as well. First, I'll start with the 4 deployment scenarios. Bare metal. A bare metal machine is a machine that is brand new and has absolutely no operating system on it. A refresh scenario is when you have an existing machine, let's say it's currently running XP or Vista, and you want to keep the hardware, but you want Windows 7 to be the new OS. You would refresh the existing hardware with the new operating system. In a replace scenario, well, that means you're physically replacing the hardware. And these scenarios come into play when we're talking about migrating older operating systems like XP that has users' data, settings, and application settings. So in a refresh scenario, you've got the same machine. In a replace, you're going to gather users' information, data, settings, application settings. You're going to toss that machine out in the dumpster out back. I know you're not really going to toss it in the dumpster, but the point is you're going to get rid of that piece of hardware, bring in a brand new computer, and put Windows 7 on as the operating system, and then put the user's data, settings, and application settings back on that machine. You're physically replacing the hardware. The last deployment scenario is an upgrade. You might have also heard these called in-place upgrades. Now, there's only one OS you're going to upgrade from. Okay, 2. You can either go from Vista or another version of Windows 7. So, XP to Windows 7, never going to happen. There's no direct upgrade path. If you wanted to, Microsoft supports upgrading from XP to Vista, and then from Vista to Windows 7. But I think that's a whole lot of work. It would just be easier to migrate that XP machine directly to Windows 7. Our first corporate environment, Wired Brain Coffee. We've talked a little bit about this in the first 2 videos. It's a really small shop, but they do have some XP machines that contain users' data, settings, and applications have been installed, so they've modified the settings of their own applications. They want those settings to be on their new Windows 7 machines. Now, some of their machines, you'll be able to do a refresh scenario on, but some, the hardware is really old, so you're going to have to do a replace. They also have the need to deploy Windows 7 to new bare metal machines. Think about the replace scenario, or just re-imaging machines as a troubleshooting step. Now, Wired Brain Coffee is a pretty small environment. They don't have billions and billions of dollars. They're not a huge corporation. They're really pretty small. 20, maybe 50 computers at most in their entire shop. And most of the time, half of those aren't even up and running. So Wired Brain Coffee doesn't have a lot of money for migrating to Windows 7. In fact, their one IT guy has been told, we don't have any money at all for you to buy any tools. So we're going to need for you to find some tools that are free, use those tools, and set it up so that we can re-image later on as that good old troubleshooting step. The second corporate scenario, that's Green Lizard Books. This is a huge conglomerate, big corporation. Its goals? They need to create an image deployment solution that can be deployed to both the corporate environment, their LAN environment, and all the branch offices. They want a corporate approved image that can be blasted out to every single machine. The images that are created, well, they have to be deployed the exact same way every single time. And when I say the same way, I mean the end result has to be 2 partitions created. You get that 100 meg partition up front for Windows 7. Then you get the C partition that has the actual Windows folder on it. Any corporate mapped drives need to show up. So the end result needs to be repeatable every single time. So when people call into the help desk can really be a little bit more help to them because they know how the base image was laid down. Once you know how the base image is laid down, it's so much easier to troubleshoot a machine, even over the phone. They need to be able to deploy Windows 7 to new machines in a bare metal scenario, and they're going to be doing refresh and replace scenarios as well. Even though this is a big, huge conglomerate, they're saying that there's little to no money in the budget for deployment tools. But they are a software assurance and an enterprise client of Microsoft. To accomplish these goals, they'll need to perform network deployments. So I'll show you what the network deployment process looks like. We have a Windows 7 DVD. We're going to install Windows 7 on a reference, or sometimes it's called a model machine. We'll set this up to look exactly the way we want it to look with desktop settings, even IE favorites if we choose. Then we'll need to sysprep that machine, scrub out all the uniquely identifying information. One thing you have to remember about sysprepping a machine is make sure you use the sysprep that was built for that operating system. Using the new Windows 7 sysprep on an XP machine, that's not going to work very well at all. So always use the correct sysprep on that reference or model machine. Step 2, store the image you're going to create from that sysprepped machine on a deployment server. You'll also need to have some way to boot up your client machines, we'll call those target machines, and get them connected to the network. Well, in this day and age, we'll use something called Windows Pre-Installation Environment, or WinPE. For anyone who's been around for a while, this is the replacement to those old DOS disks that you could boot a machine up with and connect to the network using. Step 3 is customize that WinPE. There might be drivers that need to be added for the various models of hardware that you have, or troubleshooting applications you'd like to place on your WinPE as well, just in case you need to use them. Step 4 is when you boot those target machines with that custom WinPE, you can connect to the deployment server, choose which image you would like to deploy, and download the image to the target machines, leaving them newly installed with Windows 7 images. But which image format are you going to use? In the past, Microsoft has always supported the .wim Windows image format, and we now have .vhd virtual hard drive images. So what's the difference between a WIM image and a VHD? In WIM images, there are 3 things that are glaringly different. Number 1, a WIM image, when captured, must be applied to the same drive letter that it was captured from. So if you captured it from D, it has to go back to D. If you captured it from C, it has to go back to C. The second difference is a WIM image can only contain one partition or volume of data. You'll see how that's different in a VHD in a minute. And the third, which is more of a positive point for .wim files, is multiple image files can be stored in a single WIM file. What's nice about that is if you do have a machine that has multiple partitions, you can create an image of each partition, store those images inside a single WIM file, and then everything's right in the same place, so you don't have to go search for it or make sure your naming conventions are correct. Everything in that WIM file would be deployed to create the exact same multi-partition environment. With the VHD image format, this can contain an image of the entire hard drive with multiple partitions. Now, VHDs are a little bit newer than WIM file formats. So some of the products fully support VHDs and some still don't. I'll get into that later on when we talk about those specific products. One of the most important things we're going to have to do for both Wired Brain Coffee and Green Lizard Books is create, manage, and apply our images. So the most important thing you'll need to do is boot a machine up and get it connected to the network. Then from there you can create or apply an image. But there's always going to be changes later on, so you need to find out how to make changes easily to your images. which WIM files introduced quite some time ago. It's so quick and easy to change data inside a WIM file. All you have to do is mount it to your local hard drive. It then looks like a folder. You can copy and paste from one folder to another, or from one WIM image to another. So managing your images, patching them offline, not having to go through that whole blast the image out to a machine, put the new patches on, and then create another image, where we all ended up with so many images we didn't know which was the most recent and which was the one that was tested properly and ready for deployment. No more of that nonsense. Now, to manage your images, you're just going to keep one image. You'll mount that image, make your changes to it, unmount that image, and it's ready for deployment. Both companies are going to need to have automated unattended XML scripts created. For that, we're going to use the Windows System Image Manager. And when we get into WSIM, you'll see that this guy can do anything. It's this nice snap-in that we can launch and then choose components to add to our answer file, save the answer file, and it's good to go for an automated, unattended installation of Windows 7, and it's repeatable. It will be installed the exact same way every single time. When it comes to managing the deployment process, if you're migrating older machines, well, you need to take into account the fact that you've got users' data most of the time, user settings like IE favorites, desktop settings, and you have application settings. Those need to be migrated to the new machine as well. And for that, we'll use the new User State Migration Tool, or USMT, version 4.0. Let's talk a little bit about image types. First, we have thick images. Well, a thick image has an operating system and then every single application you need for deployment. It should be fully patched, and thick images, really a thing of the past, I think. They're a lot more difficult to make changes to later if you want to edit one. If you'd like to change the version of an application that's in a thick image, the only way I know to do that is to blast the image out to a machine, remove the application or upgrade the application to a newer application version, and then create another image. There's no easy way to do that. So thick images, a couple of negatives. They make it a lot more difficult to make changes or to manage that image later, and it's going to take a little bit longer to actually deploy each thick image. If we look at the flip side of this coin, so we don't want to use thick images, they're too difficult. Let's go all the way over and use thin images. Now, normally a thin image only contains the operating system. And then any applications you'd like to have deployed are deployed using group policies, Microsoft Deployment Toolkit 2010 Update 1, System Center Configuration Manager, or manually install them. So there's a little bit more work after the deployment of your operating system occurs. This is why I like hybrid images. Hybrid images contain an operating system, of course, but then they only contain corporate-approved software that every person's supposed to get, like hardware utilities for server images, or Microsoft Office 2010 for all your desktop machines. Then, if you have one-offs of applications that need to be deployed, you could back up and deploy those using group policy, MDT, or SCCM. There are a couple types of installation. There are light touch installations, and we have zero touch installations. Really what it comes down to is LTIs versus ZTIs. An LTI requires some type of human intervention, even if it's just someone standing there powering on the machine. A human being had to touch that computer to do something. A ZTI doesn't require any human intervention to kick off the deployment process or to answer any question during the deployment process. There's only one product that can truly offer a ZTI, and that's System Center Configuration Manager. Otherwise, you're going to be performing LTIs. Windows operating systems. It's been quite a while now that we've had to activate operating systems, which just verifies to us that we have a genuine copy of a Microsoft operating system running. It's not bootleg, it's not illegal, it's a good copy. In the past, it was quite common to have your client machines connect directly to Microsoft and activate against a Microsoft server. Now you can set up your own activation server locally, have your clients activate against it. This is going to help you to figure out how many clients have activated versus how many licenses do I need to purchase. So it kind of helps you keep track of which machines have activated, which machines are working properly, which machines do you need licenses for. But activation can cause an issue if you've set up your client images to activate locally to that activation server. Don't go to Microsoft, don't even try. But then these clients never come into the office to connect to your activation server. Well, that's where in the volume activation lesson, I'll go over different types of license keys. So we can set it up so that certain clients activate against your local activation server, but those clients that are mobile users and don't come into the office often, they can go ahead and activate against the Microsoft activation servers. What we covered in the course scenarios lesson were 4 different types of deployment scenarios. I explained the difference between bare metal, refresh, replace, and upgrades. Talked a little bit about Wired Brain Coffee and Green Lizard Books, what their corporate needs are, and the fact that neither one bellied up and gave us too much money to work with. I showed you the basic 50,000-foot view for network deployment process. We talked a bit about the different image formats that we have, WIM versus VHD image formats, the types of images. You're going to go with a thick image, a thin image, or a hybrid. My vote is always going to be hybrid. It's much easier to work with later on. Then we covered the types of installations, light touch installation versus zero touch installation. And you now know the difference between an LTI and a ZTI. And I finished up with Windows operating systems and activation and your mobile clients. That wraps up the course scenarios for Windows 7 deployment training.